If you want to fly the Black Wasp, you have to wear the antenna. The objective behind the endurance event is to keep the plane in the air as long as possible without refueling. The engine size is restricted by total displacement, and there is a 4-pound gross weight limit.
I only heard about the endurance event 2 years ago when Doug decided that he was going to try and get the record. And at the time I didn't seem to think that it would be a really big deal, but I thought, well, it should be interesting anyway.
My son Daniel and I set 2 endurance records last year, and I've been trying to beat them ever since. A lot of research went into trying to improve. Here I am in February testing different fuels and an improved radio-controlled needle valve. One of the things I considered was a radio-controlled lead-out guide to increase line tension later in the flight. Instead, I saved a few ounces of weight by using a better pilot than me. Len was stellar at keeping the plane from crashing with very little line tension. When building an endurance plane, weight reduction means everything. I even made my own 5-inch wheels out of light ply. In the summer, I rigged up this homemade manometer to measure muffler pressure. Here's a look at all the different fuel tanks and bladders I tested. I was looking for the perfect combination of consistent fuel flow and light weight. I finally settled on 3 beer cans plumbed in parallel. The idea behind the parallel plumbing is that I get a single, steady fuel burn that lowers the fuel level across all 3 tanks simultaneously. The fuel pressure gradually drops and never increases, making needle valve adjustments easier. The center tank is mounted a bit lower to make sure it is the last to empty. This is important because it feeds the engine. 2 days before the record attempt, Chris Browhnill test flew the Black Wasp for me, and we discovered a serious problem with the fuel system. When less than half full, turbulence would cause the fuel to slosh around, sometimes uncovering the fuel outlet. This killed the engine. I fashioned this bubble trap out of a cigar tube and installed it in the foam tank support. You can see how it all fits together in this cardboard test stand. We used the OS manufacturer's needle valve for the LA-15 engine, but shock mounted it with grommets and connected it to a continuous rotation robot servo. I ran an extra lead from the servo out the leading edge of the inboard wing to a pair of LEDs to indicate needle valve rotation. Left, lean, green. Right, rich, red.
My biggest thought when we first got to the field that morning was that it seemed a little bit breezy, but I didn't want to say too much.
I didn't feel good about the weather at all. The forecast wind was 18 kilometers an hour, gusting 27.
I thought that Doug might want to cancel it. When I finally took off, it was a relief actually. The plane got off the ground. I knew that it was full of fuel. I wasn't sure how it would handle the fuel load because it was a full load, and I don't think the plane had ever had that much fuel in it before, and I had definitely not flown the plane with a full load of fuel, but it took off absolutely perfectly.
My camera failed and I lost the takeoff footage. I couldn't take any more video that day. I'm very grateful to Janek Zalewski and Chris Hubbard for providing the photos and video they took for us.
I've been flying for almost 40 years now in control line. My longest flight before this probably would have been somewhere around 9 or 10 minutes of actual flying. At the start, it didn't seem like it was a big deal. Everything was fine. It was just like flying a model airplane. There was a little bit of a breeze, and I was a little bit concerned about that. But as the time went on, the breeze seemed to drop off, and it became easier to fly the plane for a good long time. During that time, Doug was trying to get me to slow the model down. He wanted it to go slower so that it would go longer. And at times I wasn't comfortable with that because it seemed to me that the airplane, when the breeze would come up, would want to kind of wander and wiggle and wobble and almost try to come into the circle the odd time. But he was adamant about the fact that it would that we probably wouldn't get a record if we didn't slow the plane down and try to get more fuel conservation as we were going. But I did get more comfortable as the flight went on because the breeze did drop off, and then it was quite comfortable for the first 2 hours.
As the flight went on, we settled into a routine. I would ask Len if he could deal with less power. I would reduce the throttle 1 click on the remote and see what happens. If it was okay with Len, I would then remix the fuel, always testing rich first. If going rich increased the RPM, I knew I was too lean, otherwise I could try a leaner mix. I used my pitch pipe to find the engine RPM. That told me what the approximate fuel burn was based on earlier ground tests. It wasn't good during the first 30 minutes of the flight, and I was always pressuring Len to reduce power. With my back to the wind, I couldn't see all the turbulent wind drama that Len had to deal with. He's a great pilot and the Black Wasp is a steady plane, but look at what the wind does to it. Len and I both had a lot to deal with. A few times the plane almost crashed, but Len was able to save it. A few times the engine almost stopped, but I kept it running by slamming the needle control hard over rich. Here's an example where we both had our drama at the same time. Let's look at that again. The engine spins down, I dive for the needle control to save the engine, and Len saves the plane from stalling and crashing. We kept in touch with the officials via text messages. I used my phone to send a text and held up this sign to get their attention. It worked well.
I wanted to get the record because all I could think of was, I've been out here for 2 hours. Don't let me fall short now by just a few minutes. Let's get the record. And so every couple of laps, I'd be saying to Doug, "What's the time now? What's the time now? Where are we at? Where are we at? How come you're not telling me the time?" At 2:27, when we got to the record, it was quite a relief. As it went on after that, I started getting more tired because I'd been out there for so long, and my biggest concern then was my focus on the airplane. I was starting to worry that I was starting to lose focus from time to time. My biggest concern at that point was not crashing. When it finally stopped, it was more of a relief, I think, than anything, because I knew we had broken the record by over an hour. We had just passed that mark, and it was quite a relief when the engine finally did stop. And my first reaction was to try to keep the plane airborne as long as I could after the engine stopped, but that wasn't possible. It wanted to land very quickly. I think I'd be up to trying it again. I didn't find it to be that big a thing, except that the day after the event was the hardest part for me, because my body just reacted terribly. I think next time what I would do is I would make sure I had better shoes. I would also make sure that I had hydrated well the days going into it.
I think I've got the most that I can from the OS-15 LA engine. If I ever do this again, I'll research 4-stroke engines. In the end, we surpassed the old record by more than an hour. I attribute our success to Len's ability to fly slower using less fuel, and the use of the RC needle valve that let us establish the most efficient fuel-air mixture. It was a real team effort.